and really happy to have you all with us today for this program. We've got a great panel, some great things to talk about, so we're looking forward to it. I wanted to thank Direct Federal for once again sponsoring the Chamber's Real Estate Series, and let's get right into it. I wanted to begin as we have a conversation about the life sciences and bringing the life sciences to the suburbs, where the trends are, where the pitfalls might be, by asking Steve Magoon, who is the Director of Community Engagement for the town of Watertown and Planning, and the Assistant Town Manager, to talk a little about Watertown. I'm guessing everybody in the audience knows that Watertown's been really, really successful in this sector. It didn't happen just by coincidence. There was a lot of work that went on in the town. And Steve, thanks for joining us. I'm wondering if you could, maybe begin, just give us sort of the short history. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, none of this was happening in Watertown. How did you get from there to where you are now? And then tell us a little about what it's like now.
Sure. So I think maybe I would suggest some of this started as far back as 2009, when we went through a process with the MassBio Council or Biotech Council, and looking at our regulations and achieving a bio-ready gold designation for the community. I think that was a time when we were still coming out of a recession, and we were looking at ways to boost some economic development in town. Following that, we did a strategic framework for economic development, which really, I think, did an excellent job of defining Watertown's role in this region from an economic development perspective. And I really think, and I can certainly go into a lot more detail about any of this, but I think really helped us define where we fit and what our niche was. It also identified life sciences as a industry cluster that was ripe for Watertown. So we recognized that. It also identified areas in town that were either underdeveloped or undeveloped, and really provided an opportunity for investment. And then in 2015, we followed that up with a comprehensive plan. And that helped us identify corridors where we wanted transformation, where we wanted economic investment. And all of those things, I think, began to come to fruition. Probably the last piece that I think will, really added to that was as some of the life sciences started to locate in Watertown. And as an industry cluster, it definitely is one that wants to be near other entities. So I think when the links started to see a pretty good investment of life science users, then that was followed by a lot of other ones. And it really has proved beneficial for the town, in the sense that we're seeing a lot of investment, a lot of growth, a lot of new growth in terms of tax revenues that we wouldn't have otherwise had.
So it seems like every day there's a new project being announced. Certainly every other week it feels like there's a new project being announced. Do you have any idea? Can you give us a sense of how many companies are now operating there, or what you have under development?
There's quite a few. I don't have an accurate count on the total number of entities in town, but it is significant. Right now we have over 2 million square feet of life sciences buildings somewhere in the pipeline, in addition to what's already exists here in town. So it continues to be a major growth sector for the town. And that's meant a lot in terms of our revenue projections for the town. The only ways that our revenues go up is an increase in the tax base, and new growth is doubly beneficial, because that expands the tax base that Proposition 2.5 limits the growth of. And I will say, there's a market benefit or increase in value of properties that are either developed in life sciences or even redeveloped in life sciences. The growth in value is, many times over properties that are redeveloped for life sciences, as opposed to either office or other commercial or industrial uses.
So what has that meant in terms of commercial revenue for the town? I know that You're building a new high school and a couple of elementary schools, two, or is it three elementary schools?
What we're doing is we're building two brand new net zero elementary schools. We're doing a major renovation overall of the third elementary school. So basically all our elementary schools will be virtually new. And we're doing all of that without a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion or override. So all within that tax base that has seen the growth. We've also, funded our pension liability, which, as you can read in the national headlines, is a major issue for most communities and states across the country. And we've been able to fund that. And new growth is a major part of that.
Right. And the high school as well is new, right?
The high school, we will probably need a debt exclusion for that. We do have MSBA funding for that. And so we're moving forward with that, but likely we'll need to go through a debt exclusion for that project.
So thank you. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is help us understand, for those who are worried about this sector in terms of public safety, concerns about what might happen in some of these companies, and whether that's been an issue or not, or how the town has dealt with it.
Yeah, I think there's been some concerns about it. What we did was create a set of biosafety regulations and a biosafety committee, one that could look at the operations. I think there are significant state and federal regulations that any lab operators have to comply with, and those are pretty significant and do, I think, create a very safe framework for most users. And also, I think to some extent through the approval process, you can always consider that and what biosafety level an individual user is looking to achieve. A couple of things that we have discussed in our development review process related to that have to do with, where air exhausts come out of buildings and how that disperses over an area, and whether that, how proximate that is to residential users and things of that nature. To make sure that those are addressed. Probably the biggest impact from an actual user once they've been opened has been noise and rooftop equipment noise, things of that nature, which are not insignificant, but certainly can be addressed. It's something important to consider during the review process. But by and large, I think the users in Watertown have not been an issue. I don't think we've had anything that's risen to a level of a public safety scare or anything of that nature.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. Really appreciate your time this morning.
Sure. My pleasure. And sorry I won't be able to stay for the whole symposium. I'd love to hear all of it.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Steven Magoon.
Thank you.
The city of Watertown. It's like the town of Watertown that is a city, right?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So up next, we want to welcome two panelists. I'm really excited to have an opportunity to talk to Bob Coughlin, who is the Managing Director of Life Sciences at JLL, the real estate firm, but spent 13 years as the CEO of MassBio. He also worked as the Undersecretary of Economic Development under Governor Patrick, and he knows our suburbs well. He was a former state rep who represented the areas of Dedham, Westwood, and Walpole as a state rep. And Hunter Kass, who is the Executive Vice President of Alexandria Real Estate Equities, 15 years of real estate experience. He was in charge of the strategic growth for this company's Greater Boston development team. And before that, he worked at the MIT's endowment as a senior investment advisor. And for those of you who are not as familiar with the whole real estate sector, these are really two significant guys to have an opportunity to talk to. You can put your questions into the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. But Alexandria has done these kind of projects all over the place and really is leading the way. And what Bob has done 13 years in MassBio means that, Bob, you've kind of seen the whole cycle of really what has taken off here. And before we talk about the life sciences, I wonder in the sector there, I wonder if we could talk just briefly about what's not happening in real estate. So there was a Globe story today about the hotel business and how much that suffered. There's lots of concerns about the office market and how workers may not be coming back and offices may not need space. So give us a sense of, is there anything other than kind of the life sciences sector that is seeing the kind of growth that we're talking about today, and what you think is really happening overall in the real estate market before we get into specifics? Bob or Hunter, you want to go?
Yeah, Hunter.
Hunter, I'll let you take that.
Sure. Happy to. Thanks for letting me join. So, for us, obviously, we have about between our operating assets and our development have well over 10 million square feet in Greater Boston. So I have a pretty good insight into both, general Cambridge and then all the greater suburbs. We obviously are very fortunate to be working with Steve on multiple projects in Watertown and are excited about the opportunities there. I think what we've seen right now and would be echoed by probably Bob's colleagues at JLL is I think there's an optimism. I think individuals saw recently the head of Amazon of real estate was saying that, individuals they think will eventually be coming back to the office. But with regards to immediate action that's occurring, there's still a lot of assessment going on. Whereas I think within the life science industry, I think Bob would agree, there's a lot more action. There's a lot more deals getting done and a lot more of a momentum in a positive direction from a life science perspective, because of what we all learned very easily during this pandemic is a lot of us right now are working or doing this call from home, or many of us are, but you can't do your research from home. Bob may have a bench in his garage, but I do not. And so, that has enabled us to recognize the importance of the life science industry with regards to its need for space. And to some of your questions before, to Steve, there is great transparency into making sure what happens as science in that space is done safely, both for those that occupy it as employees of a particular company, but also to make sure that the community at large where those companies are located obviously feel safe. And ultimately, I think what we've all seen is that the activity that's occurred in those offices or in those labs, is really what enables us to see a light at the end of the tunnel with regards to, coming back to work. I mean, it is where we are getting vaccines done. It is where we're going to be able to get back to a path of normalcy. So for us as a whole, we're excited about what's occurring within, the life science space. We are seeing active deals occur. We are very fortunate in Watertown to see a lot of leasing go. And then with regards to office, as I said, it feels a lot more like a look and see market right now. But Bob has maybe a little bit more insight from the office side. Obviously, we are less exposed to being able to speak to, things with regards to retail and other stuff, although we have about 250,000 square feet of retail. And I would say we're just trying to be a very positive and active partner with our retailers to hope that they can get on their feet and live to really support the ecosystems that we all are working in. So overall, we're optimistic on the life science industry. Hope that the office, finds its way back, because at the end of the day, we need all to be working together to have a healthy market. I don't know, Bob, if there's anything you think I'm missing there.
No, I think, Hunter, you covered it. I mean, I don't think the jury's out yet on traditional office space when we're talking. And again, I focus pretty much purely on the life sciences. And the reason I decided to leave MassBio to come over to the real estate side of things is because of that demand, the unmet need as it relates to infrastructure, lab space, biomanufacturing space, et cetera. And it's busier than we've ever been in the history of the industry. And we'll come back to that. But I think to Hunter's point on the office real estate space, I mean, there's some jobs that you can do from home. There are others that you can't. You cannot cure a disease or develop a vaccine, from your garage or from your living room. You just can't. And by no means do I have a lab bench in my garage either. I'll tell you, I gave that up years ago. So when you look at what's happening out there, Greg, I mean, I think that hopefully for hotels and downtown office space and any traditional office space, law firms, accounting firms, we're hoping that will come back. I think there will be some sort of a hybrid model that we accept moving forward that may not have been something that was acceptable over a year or so ago, because certain things do work. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about traffic and where traffic plays into how companies make decisions moving forward, because I don't think when we survey employees of companies now, but folks aren't going to sit in traffic like they used to. They're just not. So there's different ways of doing things to avoid that. And I think those are some of the topics that we can talk about today as we talk about why a city like Newton is attractive.
Yeah, well, good, great, thank you. But it is, if I'm not mistaken, it really seems like when there's investment dollars or growth now, we hear about either a warehouse for an e-commerce company or a life sciences company. And a lot of other stuff is, even though a hotel did just open in Steve's neighborhood, that's not common right now, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So help us understand the suburban component of this sector, and why companies are willing and looking to get outside of Kendall Square, why they're looking to go further, and where they're looking to go further. And we know that Watertown has been very successful. It seems that Waltham has. Talk about the suburbs in general and the interest for these life sciences companies.
You want to go first, Bob, on this one?
That's up to you, Hunter. I mean, you can take it however you want to do it.
Okay. So so for us as a company, we obviously see Greater Boston as a broader ecosystem. So there's always going to be the need for, really the hub. I think all of us recognize is what's come out of Cambridge, right? You've heard us say numerous times, Cambridge is 25 years into an innovation revolution. And the balance of Greater Boston obviously can benefit from it. And much of that is because there's different stages of companies that benefit from being in the suburbs. Bob knows that we're seeing needs from a GMP perspective, which obviously are not uses that both from a size and scale can be as urban oriented. Similarly, we obviously have companies with a diverse set of employees. Some would prefer to be in a suburban oriented location. And finally, we still are seeing an evolution with regards to the hub and spoke model that is I think, ever becoming of consideration, to Bob's point, with regards to flexibility around how individuals work, the need to understand and manage commuting times. I think more than ever, now that we're coming out of this pandemic, I think we've all seen that we've benefited from an hour or two, depending on how you get into Boston, being able to get work done. And so when you put all those pieces together at a high level, it can start having you understand very much the important consideration that a suburban location, has. And for us, with regards to, Newton, we over a year ago acquired Riverside Center, the 3-building office complex. And for us, that spoke to a lot of the things I was just referencing, from an important location that obviously is connected, to a T stop at the Green Line. And we recently also acquired, a large set of properties in Fenway. The ability for individuals to get in and out of the city, I think, will come back from a transit-oriented perspective. Similarly, to Bob's part about traffic, you want to have ease of access to major highways. And then finally, there is a good amount of the researchers that do live west of the city. So when you put those pieces together, you can start seeing how suburban locations can do well. And for us, how we could see, a Newton location do well, over time. Obviously, Steve in Watertown has benefited from being west of the city as well, and in terms of, being able to bridge that a little bit closer to Cambridge, which has made it feel more like an inner urban location than a suburban, which has again, it's the variety of options that I think Boston has. And for sure, a suburban mix plays into that being something that's important to have a really holistic approach to offerings to the broader life science community. I don't know, Bob, if that's
absolutely. And I think to add a little bit to that, let's look at where this industry has come from. Okay, and let's just look at from a historical perspective. I started over at MassBio in 2007. And all we talked about was companies going to Kendall Square, right? And then, Steve, we probably would have thought that back then Watertown was a stretch, right? Because so many people wanted to come into Kendall Square, and we filled it up. And the reason that was because I like to say back then we were in like the first inning of a 9-inning game in the evolution of the biotech or, genetic engineering industry, right? You go back to 1985, biotech really wasn't even, it was a brand new term, okay? So the companies thought that they needed to be in Kendall Square to succeed. And then you have companies like Alexandria that build those ecosystems so these companies can succeed. And it filled up. And that's a good thing. But then municipalities decided that they wanted to be a little more competitive. They understood what this industry was all about. And that's when in 2007, I really saw Massachusetts made a push to become the best place in the world for this industry. cities and towns weren't fighting for it yet, but Massachusetts as a Commonwealth is fighting for it. That's when we did the 10-year billion-dollar life science initiative. Wall Street crashed in 2009, and we had to think of a different model for drug discovery so that we could succeed. And that's really when you saw things filling up and things getting more competitive and us attracting, between that date and today, we've attracted, 19 of the top 20 pharma companies to have a physical presence here. When that happens, it fills up even more, and you see spillover into surrounding communities. And then you see, the Alexandrias of the world building these world-class developments in towns, cities like Watertown, and Watertown grows. And now, I'd like to say we're only in the second inning of where this industry is going, because with the introduction of cell and gene therapy and biomanufacturing, and we'll talk more about that, you're not going to build GMP or biomanufacturing facilities anymore in Cambridge and the Seaport District. They're sprawling out. We can even go further and talk about Worcester. Worcester is a top biotech cluster in its own in the United States of America, just the way that has been built out. So again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of the city councilors from Newton being on board here. And believe me, one thing that I was on the school committee, board of selectmen, state rep. I'm even a town meeting member right now in the town of Dedham. I understand municipal and state government. And I also saw firsthand, as somebody who got into the life sciences industry for the mere reason that I have an 18-year-old son with cystic fibrosis. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I got into this industry when I was serving in the House of Representatives because I wanted to do something meaningful in the House that would make Massachusetts better for the life sciences, so a company like Vertex could invent a drug that would keep my kid alive, okay? So we found that when academia, industry were working together, we were good. When government came in and became that third leg of the stool, we became great, okay? That's how we became the best place in the world for this industry. Academia and industry was here for a couple hundred years, right? And then government really stepped up and said, we want to create an environment so that we can win these opportunities and become the best place in the world for innovation, whether it's biotech, high tech, clean tech, right? It's all tech. We're good at that stuff. So now the cities and towns literally needed to start to compete. And that's why we created the BioReady community. Steve, you talked about it. Watertown's gold rating, Newton's gold rating, but we're only going to bring these companies, on my side of the ledger now, and Hunter knows this, I love working with world-class developers like Mark and like Alexandria, but I really get excited when I can work with tenants and bring them to the right spot so that they can succeed and solve unmet medical need. That's what gets us excited. You're not going to do it in a city or town that isn't friendly to this industry, because there's so many other cities and towns that are.
So let me ask you about that. So
I get excited. I apologize.
How do we become? How does a municipality become friendly to this industry, and how does it not? I mean, we're clearly we want to be able to do what in Newton what they've been able to do in Watertown, fix the pension liabilities, build schools without overrides. How does a municipality? What are the right things for a municipality to do, and what are the wrong things for a municipality to do?
Well, you follow the lead of someone like, and I know Steve needs to leave, but he should be commended because the city of Watertown has really paved the way for how you can attract companies to come to your community. Have a point of contact, one point of contact that people can use for all things as it relates to Conservation Commission, Planning Board, permitting and all that stuff, right? It's pretty tricky here in New England to do business sometimes with a city or with even more so a town. So when you have that point of contact and you are open for business, I used to say this all the time. Deval Patrick had a 10-year billion-dollar life science initiative, but everybody knows California created one. North Carolina was kicking butt with a great initiative as well. Just the fact that the governor would put his hand out, and then you have a Republican like Charlie Baker that comes in, and it's the same thing. You don't have this fighting that's going on. There's so much fighting that's going on in federal, state, and municipal government all the time that companies don't want to get caught up in that. If you are open to business, if you have a gold or platinum rating with MassBio, that means that they're willing to bring those companies to any of the developments that are in your zip code, right? And again, it's really about teamwork. It's about taking a look at what are we doing for public transportation? What are we doing for parking? Parking is an issue. Not everyone's going to take the T, and the T hasn't been always reliable, right? Of public transportation. So, I mean, you can't just completely rely on that. You got to think of that whole live, work, play piece. And are you willing to work with that company so that they will come to your town?
Great. Hunter, are there things that a municipality absolutely shouldn't do? The things that scare you away from that community?
Look, I think when we go into and work with any community, there's always a balance of making sure some of the things that Steve brought up. Look, we all recognize it's important to deliver highly functional buildings that can be as sustainable as possible. And the sustainable as possible, I think, is the key dynamic here, because what science is occurring inside of these buildings needs certain robust infrastructure to be able to be successful. And so a path forward for approvals from a permit perspective, approvals from an occupancy perspective, speed to market right now, as Bob knows, is really important. And 3, 6, 9-month delays in a process in a jurisdiction can very quickly have both a landlord and a tenant feel very ambitious and very positive about an outcome. But the delays of 3 to 6 months in certain cases, or in many cases right now, are not palatable to tenants. And so they'll move to the next location that can meet their timeline. So expediency, I think, is really important, even when you have a partnership between the tenant and the landlord. In this case, and almost every case, you obviously also need to be able to work within a jurisdiction that enables you to execute as fast as possible, while still obviously maintaining the highest of standards of what you're going to implement, and the building's going to be sustainable. And all those things are never anything that we as a company compromise on. But it's important to find that balance, because speed, I think, especially today, and at least what we see for the foreseeable future, is going to be an important ingredient to success.
So let me ask you about, separate from the municipalities, what other amenities do companies want to be near when they're thinking about where to locate their business? We've already talked about the parking and ease of access, but what are the other amenities that people want?
I go back to that whole live, work, play. Like you want to create like a mini ecosystem that's close to where the people live, right? Because that's more important now than ever. But one of the things that we talk a lot about is, how do you build into this new mini cluster some of the things that these companies need to succeed? Shipping, right? Support services, access to supplies that they need. And again, one of a benefit to moving outside a little further away from the cities is it is more cost effective to do that. You can get acquisition costs are cheaper, but it's really that whole live, work, play piece. And when you look at where the people live and what they do for a living, I mean, this is just such an attractive area. Like Hunter was saying earlier, the closeness to 128 and the Turnpike, you're really right at a crossroads that's ease of use for the consumer, who's the worker, the employee.
And how important are clusters? How important is it to be near other companies that are doing at least similar kinds of work?
In my opinion, and Hunter, this, it's really a model that Alexandria has been so successful with. One of the things that I couldn't understand many moons ago, folks, was like, you wouldn't want to put companies close to each other because they steal each other's employees or this, that, or the other. It's the exact opposite. In biotech, it's all about convene, connect, and catalyze. We call it the 3 C's. And they love that cluster. They love to be close to each other. And one of the things that I was really amazed about when I was doing a little research earlier, and we were talking before, panelists were talking about this prior to going live, something that I really didn't realize was the amount of companies that were already in Newton, right? MassBio has 16 member companies right now in Newton proper. And if you look at what LabShares has been able to do, they had 15 tenants currently, 14 tenants graduate. The reason these types of developments that Damien's going to talk about are so important is you need to create space for these companies to graduate to. Otherwise, they are going to go somewhere else. I mean, they already want to be there. They're already there. It's already working for their company. Their employees are coming there. If you create more space for them to go to, it will be successful. So that whole cluster approach to it is so important. And again, people will ask, well, how many do you need? Well, you start. It's important to be close to people. If you have companies, a government that's supportive, a hospital nearby, that's always good. A bigger tenant or a bigger company that's close by, that's helpful too. But you just start and you build upon it.
Right. So LabShares is over on the Watertown line in Nantum, and there really aren't a lot of places in Newton to go beyond that. Hunter, you're talking about Grove Street with a couple of buildings that you got acquired last year, I guess. and then we're talking about the Riverside project. Is that sort of the natural progression then to think about as we expand out along the I-95 corridor, maybe what's happening in Needham, what's happening on the Wellesley line too along I-95, as well as Grove Street?
Well, so first off, to the first question to Bob around the ecosystem, I think if anything, the pandemic has shown the collaborative nature of this industry to solve a major problem. And the truth is, it wasn't a pandemic that forced them to act that way. It was that they acted like they always do, which is a very collaborative ecosystem. That's point one, and very different, mind you, than a lot of the name brands from a tech perspective that have much more of a privacy orientation to how they manage their business and how their employees interact with other individuals. So the collaborative nature that Bob spoke to is really at the heart of kind of this ability to build clusters. From a cluster perspective, I think the one thing I would just caution is that, you know, we obviously are talking about life science as a great catalyst for growth in certain areas, but it's not going to be the answer everywhere. And it's not going to be able to be done anywhere because a good amount of buildings are vacant. That could be, I mean, the amount of discussion we have right now, I'm sure Bob does, of, you know, there's someone in this industry that says even a 7-Eleven can get converted to B Lab. We got to be a little bit mindful here of where the right clustering can occur and who's the right sponsor of it and what are the companies that are going to grow there. So, you know, Greg saying, you know, Needham to Newton to, you know, just all of a sudden there can be this thought that there's just this never ending dynamic. I think it's a very selective process for where people are successful, and then being able to commit the resources necessary to have an ecosystem grow. And that ecosystem and clustering does not happen overnight. You need to be very patient for it to occur. I mean, I remember at my times at Matimco, one of my colleagues used to say he would die of loneliness walking from the T to the legal seafood, and that's that walk, which now
in Kendall Square, right?
In Kendall Square,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So, and by the way, that wasn't 50 years ago. That was, you know, a period of time that all of us can remember. So it takes time. It's patient, and also this is not for everyone. So. We have optimism that we have a unique set of skills to be able to be successful in this. But I think Bob would be able to speak to this too. You know, sponsorship's important and patience is very important to be able to bring all the pieces together to find a successful cluster to emerge and to be able to be, you know, kind of in a new step shift function of viable for the long term.
So yeah, okay, but I want to do specifically ask you about why Grove Street, why you think that's interesting, and what else might be along that, you know, so the I-95 corridor south of the Pike, which is not traditionally where this stuff has happened. It tends to be more Waltham and north. Help me understand the value and the potential for this area.
Yeah, look, we obviously made an investment that's not insignificant at Riverside Center. We are confident to the things we spoke about that it has a unique location and potential, given the access for vehiculars, given the ability to leverage the T, and obviously with Mark Development and what they're going to do around the area from a placemaking perspective with the mixed kind of use approach, the live, work, play, as Bob likes to say. We see opportunities, but again, not everywhere can you bring together the size and scale of commercial, residential, and retail all together. Not everywhere wants it. We think this place that you know, around Grove Street has tremendous potential in the near term. And obviously we made an investment over a year ago that spoke to that commitment and are optimistic about our abilities to do so from here on out in terms of building something very unique, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of hard work. And again, this is not something that I would speak to at all is indicative of some amoeba that just continues growing in the way you're talking about, you know, Greg. I mean, we got to be very mindful of, you know, where it can be successful, who's sponsoring it, how the capital is committed. Because I get worried sometimes that there's a thought that this can kind of just be placed everywhere. That's not really the case.
All right, I want to get back to that in a second, but there was a question from Susan Albright, who's the president of our city council, who said, it sounds like Newton is very late to the party. Do the presenters feel comfortable that the biotech trend will continue into the future. And I guess, and that's a general question too, I think specifically about whether is Newton too late to really to get in on this, but where is the bottom of this? It feels like new deals every day, every week, somewhere in the region, someone's converting a building. How big can this sector grow?
I mean, I would just add, and Hunter, again, I think we play off each other very well with this here, because I hope to God that this isn't late to the game, because I made a real bad career decision if that's the case, okay? Because, and let me tell you why I say we're only in the second inning, and no, you're not late to the game. Because if you look at the numbers historically, right, the numbers of companies that have been created in the last 4 years, the amount of venture capital dollars pumped into these startups over the last several years, the amount of IPO dollars that are in play as a result of record-breaking year over year the last few years, combined with the amount of business development dollars available in big pharma companies right now. You combine that with folks understanding that our global supply chain was broken through COVID, and folks are going to start doing things here that otherwise they might have done overseas, especially as it relates to manufacturing and manufacturing for cell and gene therapy. It's a completely different animal. It would take us another 2-hour panel to explain why that is, but we're good at making viral vectors and things for cell and gene therapy. That's going to happen in Massachusetts. It's going to happen in California. It'll happen in North Carolina, few emerging markets across the US, but we're ripe for it here. And that's going to happen up and down 128, 93, 95, 90, et cetera. So I just feel that the next 5 years are going to be quite busier than the last 5 years. So we're not late to the game. We just need to position ourselves. I could not agree with Hunter more that you can't just turn everything into life sciences. It's not going to happen. There's all sorts of pieces of that puzzle that need to fit together. And you also have to be very intentional, right? These things don't happen by accident. We didn't become the best place in the world for this industry by accident. There's a lot of work over a long period of time, but we need to continue to move in that direction. But Counselor, I hope to God that we're not late to the game here, because again, I made a real bad
Right. I'd love to bring in Damien Chaviano now, who's a principal of Mark Development. Damien, thanks for being with us. I know that, just down the street from the other project that Alexandria is working on at Riverside Station, you went through a lot of hoops to get that project approved about a year ago. And now Mark wants to go back to the city council with a change of plans to bring life sciences, include life sciences as part of Riverside. Can you tell us just a little bit about that decision? I know you want to show us some things, but give us a little idea what happened, the evolution there.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Greg, in hindsight, remind me never to do a panel with Bob and Hunter to end, because I think I'm afraid I'm going to put everybody to sleep given that degree of energy. But yeah, look, I mean, we found ourselves caught in the crossfires of the pandemic. We filed in March of 2019 for 1.5 million square feet. And by December of 2019, we were through a zoning approval with 1,025,000 square feet. That subsequently went to the land use process for a special permit, which was granted this past October for the 1,025,000 square feet, part of which included a hospitality use. And I think, as was alluded to earlier, not surprisingly, we found ourselves with a need to build that hospitality use or that building out of the gate in our first phase. And in light of where the economic environment was, we didn't see a short or medium-term answer to that question. And we were somewhat fortunate in that one of our buildings, which was previously contemplated as 250,000 square feet of office space, following our approval, although leading up to it, we were already starting to contemplate the pivot to lab life science. We got introduced to Hunter and his team out of Alexandria. So following the October approval, we were able to move forward with what we thought was an exciting opportunity to convert our first building of office to true lab life science. And when we found ourselves having to find an answer for building number 2, which had to be built or has to be built as part of phase 1, and I'll explain that more in a second, we actually felt pretty fortunate that Hunter and his team were willing to further commit to a larger life science play at this site. And I think a lot of it has to do with what you heard today. It's the clustering between our project and what Hunter owns next door, there's about 1 million square feet of lab life science. I think it plays to the accessibility to and from the site, both of public and private transportation. And most importantly, in my mind, it's really that live, work, play environment that Bob talked about. And I think we check all three of those boxes. And that's what's got us excited actually to be back in front of the city council, albeit, not for the reasons we wanted to, but we think the project is even stronger than what we got approved back in October. And to that, if it's appropriate, Greg, I'm happy to pull up some slides and just walk folks through it quickly here. And like I said, if I start to see yawns, just tip my hand and I'll jump off and we can go back to Bob. So just real quick, for those familiar with the site, or unfamiliar, I should say, it's about a 14-acre site. And what complicates things for Riverside is it's a public-private partnership with the MBTA. So this is the Green Line platform, the terminus to Riverside, which is the D line. Today, it's an active 958 surface parking lot for MBTA commuters. And it's also home to a piece of land that we own in fee, the Hotel Indigo. So at the end of the day, these two pieces of property get merged into one larger project, which we call Riverside. This is a visual here. This shows you what was approved this past October. It's what was approved was 1,025,000 square feet, as I alluded to. This is what we refer to as Building 1, which was the 250,000 square feet of office. This is what was contemplated as the hotel, or what we call Building 2. And then the balance of the project was residential and ground floor retail. And I'll show you that here in a second. So this is sort of a summary of what you just saw in number form. And a lot of this has to do with the key metrics that we found ourselves discussing with both the community and the city council. So the left-hand column starts with showing you what the open space was, and it also identifies what the requirements were that we negotiated as part of our zoning. As you can see here, the beneficial open space was previously 12%. We're now coming back at just under 10. However, we're still well above the 7.5% requirement. Total beneficial open space is 2.36 acres, or 18%. We're coming back at 15.8%, again, well above the 15%. And as I'll show you in a subsequent slide, we've got a pretty robust park commitment that we're making that I think really understates the amount of open space this project provides. Previously approved, it was just over 2,000 parking spaces. Converting to Lab Life Science, we're at 2,171. We lost 32 residential units, but we're still excited to bring 550 to this community. As you'll see here, the growth, this goes into the square footage discussion. We lost about 22,000 square feet. Really key to the discussion with our abutters was what was the ratio that was appropriate of residential to commercial. We agreed as part of our zoning that no less than 60% of the site would be developed as residential. And as you can see here, we're still above that at a 62% threshold. As I mentioned, we had 77,000 square feet of retail with 250,000, give or take, square feet of office and 39,000 square feet of lab. What we've done in this new filing, which will be in front of the City Council on April 13th is we've taken the 77,000 square feet of hotel, approximately 22,000 square feet of residential, and about 18,000 of retail, and added about 120,000, or shifted about that 120,000 square feet into the lab life science. So over two buildings, we have just under 400,000 square feet of lab life science. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the question that keeps getting asked of us is, why is it so important that Building 2 was constructed as part of Phase 1? And what I'll tell you is that, because this is a public-private partnership, because of the physical characteristics of this site, coupled with the fact that from an economics perspective, we need to bring a critical mass that's financeable for this project, one, and two, a requirement by the MBTA, which is that 3 buildings are built as part of Phase 1. We're really boxed in for what we can do. And to add to that, 2 other restraints or commitments we've made as part of this project is that we're going to be providing a $20 million offsite package to provide direct highway access to the site. And we also need to build a garage, 9 and 10, to replace the surface parking. So we've got to build all of that while most importantly maintaining an active surface parking lot for commuters. So what it means is that when you factor that into our requirements, the only buildings that can be physically built to accommodate all of those issues are buildings 2, 3, and 8, which is why it was so important for us to figure out a solution of what could be built economically to allow us to get the critical mass to go forward with our financing package. And so when you shake out the entire project, this is what you're left with. There are 10 buildings, as I pointed out. Buildings 1 and 2 will now be the lab life science components. 3, 4, and 5 provide for residential. 6, 7, and 8 and 9 also have residential with ground floor retail. Building 10 also residential. And as you can see here, the residential on 9 and 10 wrap the 2,000 stall parking garage. This just shows you quickly how we played with the moving parts as it relates to square footage. As you'll see in a second, we dropped 2 stories from building 1. We shifted some of that over to building 2, the previous hotel site. We reduced density on buildings 3, 4, and 5, and tried to shift that to the rear of the site and manage, some of the sensitivities that we had heard from the neighborhood about construction and visibility along Grove Street and the highway. So one of the hot topics that's been talked about is really how the height shifted. As you can see here, building 1, which was our tallest building in our previous approval, capped at 170 feet. As I mentioned, we've been willing to reduce that by a couple stories for a net reduction of about 26 feet. I'll go into this in more detail in some subsequent slides, but what we've done is we've also added some height here, not because we're adding stories to the building, but it really as a byproduct of the floor-to-floor heights of lab life science being higher than what would be required for hospitality, as well as a mechanical penthouse, which Steve mentioned earlier, as being a requirement for lab life science. So here's the buildings here. We're still working through the design. This project was approved through design guidelines. So the overall design characteristics of this project are still being worked through, but I think this gives you a visual representation of where we're headed. As I alluded to, building 1 has dropped down to 7 stories, building 2 being 6 stories here. And this gives you a close-up of exactly what we're talking about. And what I wanted to do, because it's important, and I think this is really the hot button issue that I believe we've got with our abutters or the neighborhood association, is give you some visuals to better understand the before and after. As you can see here from the highway, 95-128, you can see buildings 1 and 2 compared to how they sit today. This is a close-up of what was approved in October with the revision here. This now shows you again a little bit more detail and specificity on what would the building have looked like, this being building 1. This now shows you the reduction of building 1 with a little bit of an adjustment to building 2. Again, from the visual you just saw in more massing form of what it will look like before and after. And we were also asked by the community really to help us understand Grove Street and how the heights of these buildings might or might not be impacted from the previous approval. So this is a visual representation here of someone standing along Grove Street and looking back at the project. As you can see here, they've got about a 31-degree view angle looking at building 3. When you shift that for the new design, that window closes by about 2 degrees, but from Grove Street, you still can't see building 2, which we thought was important as part of the discourse going forward. And so now it starts to go into the benefits of this project, and most of you have heard these before, but we think it continues to improve. One of the biggest challenges we had with the neighborhood was really satisfying concerns about traffic. Right out of the gate, we committed to a $20 million federal highway package that provides brand new highway access to the rear of the site. You can see this dashed line where the Grove Street exit departs today in front of the Hotel Indigo. We're rerouting that highway point so it actually lands at the rear of the site. In addition, there's a number of other changes that are happening. As you can see here, Recreation Road that runs at the rear of the site is being converted to two-way, which plays into the park improvements that I'll show you in a second. And we're also including a roundabout on the southbound entry point that was part of the previous iteration. This is the parking garage that I mentioned earlier. As I alluded to, traffic has been a very hot topic. We actually see lab life science as beneficial to this discussion. As we've studied lab life science vis-a-vis general office, what we've realized is the lab life science user doesn't work those conventional office hours. And so what you're seeing when you look at this chart is that the overwhelming majority of the lab life science employee base is entering the site well before that 9 a.m. Peak hour that you typically see in general office. And in the back end of that, they're also leaving. So what it does is it effectively shifts the peak periods of time to different points in time. And that's highlighted here. We see this as a big net positive based on some of the community concerns that we've heard. That shift in peak, although the daily traffic stays basically the same, as you can see here, it's a 1% increase. When you look at the peak times on weekdays, you see as much of a 36 to 38% reduction, and on Saturdays or weekends, as much as a 40% reduction. So
I want to interrupt you for a second, just bring in Bob. Bob, can you confirm are these 9 to 5 jobs, the folks who works in these kinds of businesses?
No, it's not a 9 to 5 job. The people that work in the labs, it's off hours, and that's why traditional traffic studies of using these peak times don't work for the life sciences industry. So I think Damien and the team did a good job here because, again, some people come in at flex hours. I mean, one of the first times I realized that it's difficult for R&D people to work from home or at set hours wasn't during COVID. It was when we had that brutal winter with several storms. People actually had to stay in their labs because you have animals, you have labs that you're keeping alive, you have things that are going on, and it's just, you need to be there for it. So it's not traditional 9 to 5.
Thank you. Damien, sorry, back to you, but we want to, we're keeping an eye on the clock though.
Yeah,
right?
I'll be wrapping up here shortly. So as I alluded to earlier, when we think about open space, we think we've made a much larger commitment to the overall look and feel. And I think this plays to the amenity discussion you heard earlier from both Hunter and Bob. As part of this project, we're committing $3 million to open up about 32 acres of trail behind the site that we're thrilled to offer as part of this project. This gives you some visual representation. The other component of this is we will be coming back with more affordable units. As you see on the left-hand side here, although there were more gross units, 582 versus 550, we're going to be coming back at 20% of the units being affordable, albeit in different AMI levels, but for a net add at the end of the day of 8 additional affordable units over and above the previous approval. Lastly, and I think you heard about this from Steve Magoon, it really comes down to the fiscal story. And I bring this slide up. Many of you know Mark Development. We're very active in the Newton submarket. We've got 5 projects that flank Washington Street running parallel to the commuter rail. And as you look at most of those sites today, our vision for that area is predominantly residential. And I'll tell you, the feedback we have heard so far in the permitting process from the city council is we want more commercial tax base. And I will tell you, when you look at the math on residential versus commercial, it's no surprise that it's exponentially greater. And so for us, we were thrilled to be able to provide Riverside with a sizable tax discussion. And that's, something that we think, shouldn't be ignored as part of this dialogue. And that's really even specific to the lab life science. So this is just a quick summary to show you, the before and after. This is just focusing on one building and to give you sort of a visual representation of the incremental taxes. As you can see here, building 1, which was the previously contemplated general office, when you look at the average assessed value across Newton for Class A office buildings, it's about $300. For research and development, based on preliminary estimates, we think that'll be around $463. So using the same square footage, the same building, but a change in use, we think that alone alone accounts for a 55% net increase in tax revenue. So when you factor that into our project, when you drop to the bottom line, even after you account for the revenue that a hotel could generate from a meals and occupancy tax, which isn't insignificant, we're thrilled to be coming back to the city council with a per annum increase of over $800,000. And as you've heard, I think that's critical as we try to look at some of the citywide infrastructure and improvements that are being talked about, myself being a Newton resident and kids in the school system. So just to summarize, this is my last slide, Greg, and then I'm done. This just kind of gives you where we think the net project benefits land versus the trade-offs. Hunter, who's going to be joining us in this endeavor here, buildings 1 and 2, he's pushed the envelope on sustainability. They were previously approved as LEED Silver. Hunter and his team, who really sees sustainability as a key attribute of these projects, is committing to LEED Gold. As I said, building 1 reduced from about 170 feet to 143. Peak traffic is going down dramatically. Incremental taxes year over year are dramatic. We have 110 net affordable units versus 102. I didn't speak about this earlier, but the frontage along Grove Street, which was a hot topic amongst the community, is being reduced as well. And all of that in our minds is really for a trade-off of about 36 feet net, give or take, on building 2. So that's what
I'm gonna cut you right off there because I got a couple more questions for these guys. And I want to say that I certainly heard from city councilors over the years, why aren't we building more, investing more to grow our commercial tax base? And this clearly is that project. But a question for Bob and Hunter. We talked a little with Steve about the sort of safety issues, concerns about what might happen inside these buildings and whether it's safe to be living in proximity. Can you help us understand that and any issues there might be related to that? Bob, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe. These labs are where the science is being performed in there, and it's done in a very safe way. I mean, I think Hunter and the folks who build out these developments have been doing it for a long time, and they understand what needs to be done, not only for the safety of with the rules, the OSHA rules and everything that are taking place for the employees that work in these buildings, but also folks around them. So it's very safe.
Great, thank you. And then finally, guys, thank you so much for both of you, all of you, for your time. But Hunter and Bob, just want to let you give you a chance to kind of summarize anything we didn't get to in this topic.
No, I'm good. I just appreciate the time and the ability to talk to the group. So thank you.
Yeah.
And trying to keep up with Bob's enthusiasm, it's never easy.
Well, when you think about it, though, in closing, folks, if you can create jobs and drive the economy and generate tax revenue, and at the same time come up with a vaccine so that the world's economy can get back on, if you can generate invented drugs so that a kid with cystic fibrosis doesn't die before his parents, that's what we do in this industry, and that's what these people do every day when they go to work. So I always just like to say, if you can create good jobs, drive the economy, and do good for humankind, it's a great industry, and it's an honor for Massachusetts to be the best place in the world for this industry.
Thank you both very much. Really appreciate it. And we are once again ending on time, which is our thing of pride here for the chamber. Thanks everybody for participating. We will make this video available to share when it's over. Thanks to our guests. Thanks to Direct Federal for sponsoring. And everybody have a great day. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.